We'll begin our talk today about women in the Progressive Era. You are encouraged to take notes, as you can use those notes on your quiz on Thursday that we will have at the beginning of class. If you remember the Progressive Era of the 20th century, we talked about this in our economic unit. It was right after the populist era, and the Progressives wanted the government to get more involved in people's lives, really to protect them and to regulate. We talked about people like Teddy Roosevelt and Upton Sinclair, who wrote The Jungle. We talked about rat dung and people's food, but we really didn't talk a lot about women. Women really were the driving force behind the Progressive era in many different ways. Just some generic things, clean water, women of the Progressive Era, trash collection, hot lunches at schools, community playgrounds, fire codes for office buildings, public libraries, and so much more. We're going to talk specifically about what women did during this time period. Again, to specifically refresh your memory, it was from 1900 to 1920. These were mostly middle-class reformers in the cities. They wanted government regulation to protect its citizens, kind of like the Meat Inspection Act, and they wanted to expand democracy. Things like the referendum, for example, a current event is obviously the fact that marijuana is being, put on referendum, which is a statewide law that people get to vote on a specific issue. It's passed and, being considered in many states. Illinois is coming up. But the referendum, that idea of having like a statewide election on a specific issue, was made possible during the Progressive Era. And women are going to take a very active role. So let's talk specifically about what they did and what's happening here. Before, as we talked in the 18th and 19th century, men and women often worked together. Yes, women were typically in charge of the home, but especially if you lived on a farm, you were doing things together. And most Americans lived on the farm. You see a trend towards people moving to the cities not until really the 1920s. But we do see at the end of the 19th century, and actually probably in the 1870s and 1880s, men are working in the factory system, and it was very demasculating from them. It was very hard to transition from working for yourself, maybe in a shop or on a farm, and then working for someone else and being timed on what you do. And you will see that they're going to be paid a wage. And many women are going to have to not only take care of the home and keep up the home, but also have to go to work. They would give their wages to their husband. Also, during this time period, we see more colleges are open for women, like for example, like in social work or nursing or to be a teacher. But more college opportunities are open for women as we go into the era right after the Civil War. What did women do? They would research, implement programs. They would specifically try to address social, political, and economic problems of society, to try to reform society. But again, it oftentimes dealt with the home. Women are able to work in department stores, they're clerical workers, and like I said, many women, middle and upper class women, if you had the money for college, are entering college and graduating college. You had a few women that were excelling as lawyers, doctors, journalists, and scientists. And as women begin to work, the question arises, should women be allowed to work as long and as hard as men? Can their bodies actually maintain this long work hour, this long work day that men are subject to? So in 1903, Oregon passed a law limiting all women in their state, saying they can't work more than a 10-hour day. Understand there was no minimum wage or no maximum work week. Many people work at least 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. Well, this law is going to be heard by the Supreme Court in 1908. And the court case is Miller versus Oregon. The Brandeis brief was a brief submitted that argued that long working hours actually physically harmed women and their health, and that it hurt the family. Well, the court's going to listen to the Brandeis brief, and they agreed. So it's almost like at the time period, people were saying, wow, women don't have to, women are placed in this special class by themselves. They're protected. Again, years later, people are going to say, well, ooh, that was a really bad case, because later people will say, well, women can't be do this type of work. They can't be construction workers, because the court is actually going to rule and say women are different and they're a part of a special class. To talk specifically about Florence Kelley, this is a progressive reformer. She thought, again, coming from the aspect of the home, that women are hurt by unfair prices of goods. So she formed this, National Consumer League, and it gave labels. So like products that were made, she would say, oh, this was made in an unsafe working condition, or a safe working condition, healthy working conditions. She really wanted to try to kind of have a rating system to encourage women to buy things and to buy products from that have a favorable rating from her and her organization. She also helped form the Women's Trade Union League, so she was very concerned about working conditions for females, and she wanted a minimum wage and a maximum hour work week, which they did not have during the Progressive Era. If you've ever seen this magazine, I don't suspect any of you would have read it, but it's Good Housekeeping, and they have this today, and this was created by Florence Kelly. She would have this seal of approval, like certain products, you should buy them. We still have this today, Good Housekeeping seal of approval. Basically, Good Housekeeping will look for products that they will guarantee, and if something goes wrong with them, even though they didn't create them, they will make sure that people get a refund. Oh, and by the way, this is one of my favorite actresses. Tell me if you know what show she plays on Channel 5. Also, if you remember talking about the temperance movement, we mentioned this in the early 19th century. This movement will continue. In the 1870s, the Women's Christian Temperance Union was formed, and you know that the 18th Amendment was passed. So this organization was eventually successful at achieving their goal. To now talk about another progressive reformer. Her name's Margaret Sanger, and she believed that all women should have information on preventing pregnancy. This is birth control that we're talking about. Now, she was a nurse. She had 3 children of her own, and she would often be called to places where, a female was almost dying or died during childbirth, and a woman would continuously get pregnant because they didn't have this knowledge of birth control. She was one of 11 children, so she saw, the problems and the pain that having children caused for her own mother, and she wrote about that. And she thought that oftentimes the upper class had information about birth control that the poor or lower classes didn't have. And so her idea was to give this information, to actually send it to mailers and have it available for all women, how to use birth control and to limit the amount of pregnancies that you had. Obviously, many of you can guess that many religious organizations were against this. She's going to be jailed many times, but eventually federal courts gave her the authority and allowed her really to give this information out. If you've heard of Planned Parenthood, she is considered the founder of that organization as she opened the first birth control clinic in the United States. As we move on to the fight for suffrage, if you remember, we had a fight for suffrage already with the Seneca Falls Declaration in 1848, that convention that was held. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, they had been pretty much working their entire lives, really from the 1840s, really all the way to the 1890s, working for women to get the right to vote. Susan B. Anthony, she was actually arrested for attempting to vote in the presidential election of 1872, and she was charged a $100 fine, which she did not pay, but they did not want to put her in jail and make her a martyr for the cause. You will see later in the movie Iron Jawed Angels, the judge will take a different approach, but these ladies were definitely kind of like the mothers of the movement, and they're ready to pass on the torch really because of their old age to a new generation of suffragettes during the Progressive Era. Carrie Chapman Catt, as you can see here, is going to be one of the suffragettes that we're going to be talking about, and you're going to actually watch in the movie Iron Jawed Angels. She was the first female superintendent of schools, and she will become president of the National Women's Suffrage Association in 1900. Now, she had what was called the winning plan, and because of this new referendum process, she wanted each state to adopt allowing women the right to vote. And in 1918, Michigan did, New York. So her plan was considered to be more conservative, more moderate at the time somewhat, and it's going to go in direct contrast with another lady, Alice Paul, who formed the National Woman's Party. And Alice Paul will break from Nassau, and she will use public protest marches, and she will lobby Congress. She will be the first group, the National Women's Party will be the first group to picket outside of the White House, and she will be put in jail for it, and you will actually see that in the movie. Please make sure that you took notes and you are ready for a quiz on Thursday. Thank you.